There is a place in the heart of American music that is more than just a stage. It's a shrine, a 6-foot circle of worn, pale oak set into the gleaming floorboards at the center of the Grand Ole Opry stage. It looks unassuming, but it is consecrated ground. That wood was cut from the floor of the Ryman Auditorium, the mother church of country music, the place where the very soul of the genre was forged. To stand in that circle is to join a ghostly, glorious procession. It is to place your feet where Hank Williams unleashed his poetic torment, where Patsy Cline broke 1,000,000 hearts with a single note, where Johnny Cash, defiant and clad in black, stared down the establishment. To step into that circle is the culmination of a dream. It's a declaration that you are no longer just a singer, but a part of the story. It means you belong. Now imagine a young man with a guitar and a smile who first stepped into that sacred circle in 1956, when Eisenhower was president and rock and roll was a teenage rebellion. And then imagine he kept stepping into it. He stood in that circle as the world spun madly on its axis. He was there when the Nashville sound smoothed out country's rough edges, and he was there when the outlaws roughed them up again. He was there through disco, through new wave, through the pop country gloss of the 80s, and the Garth Brooks explosion of the 90s. He was there as the 21st century dawned. Week after week, year after year, decade after decade, a constant, comforting presence. He wasn't the biggest star. His name didn't thunder with the same mythic weight as Cash or Haggard or Jones. He was something else, something quieter, but essential. He was the man who brought an entirely new color to country music's palette, a flavor that was spicy, joyful, and utterly foreign to the hills of Tennessee. He carried the sound of the Louisiana swamps, the rhythm of the bayou, the very language of his ancestors, and he laid it down as an offering inside that hallowed circle. To truly grasp the magnitude of Jimmy Newman's journey, one must first understand the profound cultural chasm he had to cross. The two worlds that shaped him were separated by far more than the 600 miles of highway between them. They were, in the middle of the 20th century, practically different universes. Born Jimmy Eves Newman in 1927, he was raised on a farm just outside of Mamou, a town that proudly calls itself the Cajun music capital of the world. This was a world that felt to the rest of America almost like a foreign country. Its people were the descendants of the Acadians, French settlers exiled from Nova Scotia by the British in the 1700s, in an event known as the Grand Derangement. Theirs was a story of exile, survival, and fierce cultural pride. Life here moved to a different rhythm. The air was thick with the scent of chicory coffee and simmering gumbo. The dominant language in the home and in the community was not English, but a unique musical dialect of French. And the music was the lifeblood of the culture. It was Cajun music, a sound born not in churches or solitary contemplation, but in the raucous communal joy of the Fay Doo-Doo, the weekend dance party. Its sound was unmistakable. It was driven by the frantic, soulful push and pull of the diatonic accordion, an instrument that wheezed and sang like a human voice. It was propelled by twin fiddles, playing in a close, scraping harmony that was both ecstatic and sorrowful. The rhythm was a driving two-step, or a heart-wrenching waltz, underpinned by the simple sharp ting of the triangle, or tit faire. The songs, sung in Cajun French, told stories of lost love, mischievous alligators, and the simple, profound imperative to laisser les bon temps rouler, let the good times roll. This was not the lonely, mournful sound of the Appalachian hills. This was the vibrant, resilient, and deeply communal sound of the swamp. Growing up, Jimmy Newman was a boy caught between these two worlds. On the radio, he heard the siren song of the singing cowboys, Gene Autry and Roy Rogers, and dreamed of Nashville's stardom. He got a guitar for his 14th birthday and learned their songs. But all around him, in the dance halls and on his neighbors' front porches, was the undeniable pulse of his heritage. He absorbed it all. He was a cowboy dreaming in English with a Cajun soul that thought in French. The central question of his life was already taking shape on that Louisiana farm. Could he build a bridge between these two worlds, or would the chasm between them prove too wide to cross? Jimmy Newman's professional ascent began fittingly on a stage that was itself a bridge, the Louisiana Hayride. Broadcasting with 50,000 watts of power from the Shreveport Municipal Auditorium, the Hayride was a star-making machine, second only to the Grand Ole Opry in prestige. It was known as the Cradle of the Stars because it was more adventurous than the Opry, more willing to take a chance on new, unproven sounds. It's where a nervous young Elvis Presley first gyrated his way into the public consciousness. For Jimmy Newman, it was the perfect training ground. He joined the Hayride cast in 1949, and it was there he honed his craft, developing a stage presence and learning how to win over a crowd. And it was there that he had a fateful encounter with the biggest star of them all, a man who would inadvertently christen him for the rest of an entire nation. Hank Williams, the undisputed king of country music, was a fellow Hayride performer. As the legend goes, Hank, whose mercurial genius was matched only by his famous impatience, was looking for the young singer from Mamou. Not bothering with the French pronunciation of his middle name, Yves, Hank simply boiled it down to its essence. "Hey, where's that Cajun boy at?" he'd holler backstage. He started calling Jimmy Cajun, which eventually he just shortened to the initial C. The nickname stuck, a branding bestowed by musical royalty. From that day forward, Jimmy Newman was known to the world as Jimmy C Newman. The C was his mark of otherness, a badge of honor, and, as it would turn out, a commercial hook. His growing popularity on the Hayride caught the ear of Randy Wood, the ambitious founder of Dot Records, a new label based in Gallatin, Tennessee. Wood saw potential in the handsome, smiling singer from Louisiana and signed him to a contract in 1953. This was the moment. Jimmy packed his bags for Nashville. But the Nashville he entered was a cautious town. His first recordings for Dot played it safe. His debut hit, 1954's Cry, Cry, Darling, was a beautiful tear-soaked ballad that climbed to number 4 on the Billboard country chart. It was pure, unadulterated honky-tonk, delivered with sincerity and skill. There was not a hint of an accordion, not a whisper of French. It was Jimmy C Newman proving he could play the Nashville game by Nashville's rules. He followed it with other solid country hits like Seasons of My Heart, later made famous by Johnny Cash. He had proven his bona fides. He could sing their music, and he could do it well. This success was his golden ticket. In 1956, the call came. He was invited to become a member of the Grand Ole Opry. At just 29 years old, he had reached the pinnacle. Once he was inside the gates, however, a quiet transformation began. Secure in his position, he started to take a gamble. He began to introduce, bit by bit, the sounds of his home. It was a calculated risk. He formed his own touring band, which he would eventually name Cajun Country, and he recruited some of the finest musicians from Louisiana. Most notably, he brought in the legendary Rufus Thibodeau on fiddle, and crucially, Bessel Duhon on accordion. Then in 1957, he dropped the bomb. He released Alligator Man. Musically, it was unlike anything on country radio. It was built on an infectious Cajun two-step rhythm, driven by Duhan's bouncing accordion. The song itself was a fun, folksy tale, but its sound was a declaration of identity. It was a fusion, a perfect blend of country storytelling and Cajun energy. Nashville was intrigued. The song was a crossover hit, and it gave him a nickname that would last a lifetime, the Alligator Man. He had done it. He had built the bridge. For the next decade, he solidified this unique identity. He scored hits with Diggy Diggy Low and Bayou Talk, songs that wore their Louisiana heritage on their sleeves. Most daringly, he recorded and performed songs in his ancestral language. His rendition of the Cajun anthem, Lâche pas la patate, literally, don't drop the potato, a regional idiom for don't give up, became one of his signatures. To stand on the stage of the Grand Ole Opry, a bastion of Anglo-American culture, and sing in fluent French was a quiet but revolutionary act. He was teaching the Mother Church a new language. While his days as a consistent top 10 artist in the U.S. wound down by the mid-1960s, his career entered a new phase. He became a beloved global ambassador for his unique sound. He was a massive star in Europe, where audiences had a voracious appetite for authentic American roots music. He toured relentlessly, headlining festivals, and playing to packed houses who adored his high-energy show and his exotic, joyful music. Through all the changing tides of popular music, his role at the Opry remained his anchor. He became part of the institution's very soul. New stars would rise and burn out. Trends would come and go, but every weekend, or so it seemed, Jimmy C Newman was there. In his brightly colored sequined suits, a wide grin on his face, squeezing life into his accordion, he was a living, breathing piece of history. He was no longer just a member. He was part of the Opry's permanent family, a constant and comforting presence in country music's most sacred home. Behind the perpetual smile and the vibrant stage costumes of the Alligator Man was a man of remarkable consistency and quiet dedication. The public saw the joie de vivre, the infectious energy, but his friends, family, and peers saw the bedrock of stability that made such a long career possible. The whirlwind of a life in music, with its constant travel, fleeting fame, and notorious temptations, was grounded for Jimmy by one unwavering force, his wife, May. They met in his early days before the Nashville fame, and married in 1954, the very year his first hit was climbing the charts. Their marriage would endure for 6 decades, a staggering feat in any walk of life, but particularly in the high-pressure world of entertainment. May was not just his wife, she was his partner in every sense. She was the steady hand, the quiet confidant, the keeper of the home fires that provided him a sanctuary from the road. While the sagas of George Jones and Tammy Wynette played out like public soap operas, Jimmy and May built a life of private devotion. This profound stability was his secret weapon. It freed him from the drama that consumed so many of his contemporaries, allowing him to focus on the craft of his music and the marathon, not the sprint, of his career. This sense of professionalism and decency defined his reputation at the Opry. In the close-knit, often competitive backstage world, Jimmy was known as a gentleman. He was never the star demanding the best dressing room or the most prominent spot on the bill. He was a craftsman who showed up, did his job with infectious enthusiasm, and treated everyone with respect. Opry legend Bill Anderson, a peer for decades, remembered him as a class act, always smiling, always professional, and you could always count on him to get the crowd on its feet. He was part of the fabric of the community, sharing stories and coffee with fellow elder statesmen like Porter Wagoner and Gene Shepard, a familiar and friendly face in a world that was constantly changing around them. Yet, For all his insider status, he carried the constant awareness of his unique role as a cultural mediator. He understood his mission with a clarity that was far more profound than the light-hearted nature of his hit songs might suggest. His own words reveal the careful thought behind his art. "I've tried to do what they call commercial Cajun," he once explained in an interview. "Not a real hardcore Cajun, but I've used the accordion and the fiddle and the triangle and the French. I've tried to do it where people could understand it, and it wouldn't be too much of a strange sound to them." This single quote is the Rosetta Stone for understanding Jimmy C. Newman's entire career. It's a statement of purpose from a man who knew he was walking a tightrope. Notice the language, commercial Cajun, not too much of a strange sound. He knew that the unvarnished, raw, and deeply French music of a master like Henri Lejeune would be completely alien to the ears of the average country fan in the 1950s. He knew he had to be a translator. He had to carefully select the most accessible elements of his culture, the infectious rhythm, the unique instrumentation, a few key French phrases, and weave them into the familiar structure of a country song. It was a brilliant strategy, an act of masterful cultural diplomacy. But one can also hear the subtle melancholy of compromise within that statement. The inherent admission is that his hardcore culture, in its purest form, was considered too strange for the mainstream. To be accepted, it had to be diluted. He had to be the affable ambassador, the friendly face of a foreign sound, careful never to be too foreign. This was the complex emotional and psychological weight he carried. He was celebrated for bringing a new flavor to the table, but he always knew he couldn't serve the full, authentic dish. He lived and worked in that delicate, challenging space between heritage and commerce, a space that defined his remarkable success but also confined him to a permanent, colorfully decorated niche. The life of Jimmy C. Newman was not marked by the kind of scandals that make for breathless documentaries. There were no arrests, no public feuds, no dramatic divorces. The controversies that defined him were quieter, more academic, but they cut to the very core of his artistic identity. For his entire career, he was at the center of a two-front debate about authenticity and classification, a cultural tug-of-war that pulled at him from both his home state and his adopted city. From one direction came the skepticism of the purists. Back in Louisiana, in the heart of Acadiana, there was a contingent of musicians, folklorists, and fans who viewed Jimmy's Nashville success with a wary eye. To them, authentic Cajun music was a sacred tradition. It was the raw, haunting sound of the accordionist and singer Henri Lejeune, the soulful fiddles of the Balfa brothers, music that was inseparable from the French language and the communal rituals of the dance hall. In their eyes, Jimmy C. Newman had taken this sacred music, polished it up, stripped it of its most essential hardcore elements, and sold simplified, Americanized version to the masses. His use of English lyrics, standard country song structures, and a backbeat that owed as much to Nashville as it did to the bayou was seen as a commercial compromise, a dilution of the culture for personal gain. To these guardians of the tradition, he wasn't an ambassador. He was a popularizer who had sanded off the very splinters that gave the wood its character. From the other direction, within the Nashville establishment, he faced the opposite, yet equally limiting judgment. In Music City, he was overwhelmingly seen and marketed as a novelty act. He was the Cajun guy, the Alligator Man. His music was fun, a guaranteed crowd pleaser, perfect for a short, high-energy segment on the Opry, but it was rarely afforded the same artistic weight as the work of his contemporaries. While George Jones was hailed as the greatest voice of country soul, and Merle Haggard was the poet of the common man, Jimmy C. Newman was the guy with the accordion who who sang about crawfish and digging potatoes. This categorization was a glass ceiling. It gave him a career, a durable one at that, but it also kept him permanently in his own lane. He was an attraction, an ethnic flavor added to the show, but he was never fully integrated into the central narrative of what country music was. This pigeonholing wasn't necessarily malicious. It was the music industry's reflexive tendency to simplify and categorize. But it meant that his considerable skills as a vocalist and a classic country singer, the skills that got him to Nashville in the first place with Cry, Cry, Darling, were often overlooked in favor of the more marketable Cajun persona. He was trapped in a paradox of his own making. In Louisiana, he was seen as not Cajun enough. In Nashville, he was seen as too Cajun. This historical debate highlights a classic dilemma for any artist from a distinct regional or minority culture. Assimilate and risk losing your soul, or remain fiercely authentic and risk total obscurity. Jimmy C. Newman chose the middle path, the path of the bridge builder, but this path is fraught with its own challenges. By existing in the space between two worlds, you run the risk of never being fully claimed by either. The very fusion that made him unique also made him permanently other. This unresolved tension is the quiet controversy that simmered beneath the surface of his entire 60-year career. To assess the historical significance of Jimmy C. Newman is to look beyond the Billboard charts and into the very DNA of American popular music. His legacy is not one of a chart-topping megastar, but of a quiet revolutionary, a cultural pioneer whose impact was as profound as it was underappreciated. His primary consequence was to serve as a bridge, permanently connecting the isolated cultural island of French Louisiana to the mainland of American country music. Before Jimmy C. Newman, the sound of the accordion on a country record was a rarity. After him, it became a possibility. He single-handedly introduced and normalized the core elements of Cajun music for a national audience. The syncopated two-step rhythm, the sound of the fiddle and accordion playing in harmony, the texture of the triangle, he wove these threads so skillfully into the fabric of country music that they became part of the available palette for future generations. He didn't just open a door, he built a 4-lane highway. Artists who followed, most notably the raging Cajun Doug Kershaw, owed him an immeasurable debt. Kershaw's wild, frenetic, and more hardcore style was able to find a national audience in the late 1960s, precisely because Newman had spent the previous decade preparing America's ears. He had done the introductory work, making the strange sound familiar. Without the affable Alligator Man, the more feral raging Cajun might have been a cultural leap too far for the mainstream. Beyond his musical influence, Newman's legacy is deeply intertwined with the act of cultural preservation. In the mid-20th century, Cajun French was under threat, discouraged in schools, and looked down upon by the English-speaking majority. Every time Jimmy C. Newman stood on the nationally broadcast Grand Ole Opry and sang a chorus of Lâche pas la patate, he was performing an act of cultural defiance and validation. He was signaling to hundreds of thousands of listeners, including young Cajuns back home, that their language and their culture were something to be proud of, something worthy of a national stage. In his own gentle, entertaining way, he was a soldier in the fight to keep a unique American culture alive. His long, unwavering tenure at the Opry also forces us to consider the nature of that institution itself. What is the Opry's role in the modern age? By honoring its tradition of lifelong membership for stars like Newman, it serves as a vital, living museum, a place where the architects of the genre can still be seen and heard long after their commercial peak. It's what separates the Opry from a simple concert series. However, Jimmy's story illuminates the poignant downside of this model. It can create a situation where a beloved veteran fades into the background, becoming a cherished but often overlooked piece of the Opry furniture. His loyalty was rewarded with permanence, but permanence does not guarantee prominence. This leads to the most troubling aspect of his legacy, the profound quiet that accompanied his death in June of 2014. He passed away just weeks shy of his 58th anniversary as an Opry member, a tenure of service almost unparalleled in the institution's history. Yet, in the hyper-connected 24/7 media landscape of the 21st century, the passing of this giant of cultural fusion was met with little more than a whisper. The major country music news outlets, the award shows, the television specials, they were largely silent. The Opry itself mourned him as family, but the broader industry he had served for a lifetime seemed to have already turned the page. It was a heartbreaking final confirmation of his career-long status as the ultimate insider who remained an outsider. His death revealed a crack in the facade of the Nashville family, a sad truth about how quickly institutional memory can fade when it isn't commercially convenient. His significance, therefore, is a powerful, complicated mix. He was the innovator who sounded like a traditionalist, the cultural ambassador who was typecast as a novelty, and the loyal institution man whose ultimate departure underscored the fickle nature of fame and remembrance. In the final accounting, when the stage lights go dark and all the songs have been sung, how do we measure the worth of a life like Jimmy C Newman's? If we measure it in #1 hits or stadium tours or headlines, we will miss the point entirely. His was a different kind of greatness, a greatness measured in longevity, in authenticity, and in the quiet courage it takes to be unapologetically yourself in a world that asks you to be something else. He was not a blazing comet, he was the North Star. For nearly 60 years, he was a fixed point of joy and cultural pride in the Nashville sky. His story is not a tragedy of being forgotten, but a profound and poignant lesson in what we choose to remember. He took the music of his tiny corner of the world, the heritage of an exiled people, and he didn't just share it. He wove it into the permanent fabric of America's most iconic musical institution. He did it with a smile, a squeeze of his accordion, and a masterful understanding of how to build a bridge across a cultural divide. The silence from the mainstream at the end of his life doesn't negate the decades of sound he created. It doesn't erase the thousands of nights he stood in that sacred circle and brought the sound of the bayou to the heart of Tennessee. It only serves as a stark reminder that pillars are often invisible. We take for granted the foundations that hold up our great houses, only noticing the space they occupied once they are gone. Jimmy C Newman's legacy isn't found in a museum exhibit or a rock and roll hall of fame. It lives in the lilt of a French phrase in a country song. It breathes in the wheeze of an accordion on a Nashville recording. It dances in the rhythm of a two-step being played in a bar far from Louisiana. He was the Alligator Man, the Cajun cowboy, the gentleman of the Opry. He was the loyal servant who showed up year after year to remind Nashville where he came from. He never stood taller than the giants, but he stood with them longer than almost anyone. And in doing so, he made the circle whole.